Now, a dedicated police task force set up to bring down grooming gangs has supported police forces in England and Wales to make hundreds of arrests in its first year.
In the last 12 months, the crack team of expert investigators and analysts have helped police forces arrest over 550 suspects, identify and protect over 4,000 victims, and build up robust cases to get justice for these appalling crimes.
Well, joining us now in the studio is GB News reporter Charlie Peters. Good to see you this morning, Charlie. And the work of this task force, well, it has to be applauded, really, doesn't it? Because they've protected thousands of victims, surely.
Yeah, that's right. And a core part of the success that they've had, all these arrests, the suspects that they've brought in and those investigations they've launched, they're saying that's on the back of training over 400 specialist officers. Now, a major issue, if you speak to police officers who work in this field of complex child abuse, they do say that there is a major issue in the police of skill fade. Many of the long-term investigators in the police leaving the force and leaving behind the skills and drills required to capture so many of these gangs, both online and in person. On-street grooming is a serious issue, but of course so much of the problem now is that it's happening online. So a core part of that training that this task force is doing, supported by the National Crime Agency, is about data officers, data analysts, to gather that information. So they have a complex and organised child abuse database as a part of this NCA-supported task force. And it's been a campaigning victory for GB News as well, because we called for a specialist task force of this nature last year after a documentary we broadcast in February on the grooming gang scandal, because it had been so clear across the country, and across all 42 police forces in England and Wales, actually, that when the NCA stepped in, kind of Britain's FBI, there was a more robust approach to justice and achieving some of the outcomes that victims and campaigners required. And all too often, as this country knows, for several of the localised on-street grooming issues that Britain faced, particularly in Rochdale, in Rotherham and in Telford, several other towns and cities across Britain, when local forces were left to their devices, they ignored the issue, in part due to racial nervousness and political correctness, but also just due to a lack of capability, poor skills and technique in dealing with on-street grooming. So 1 year in to this task force, I have to say it's very reassuring news.
Do you think lessons have been learnt from the likes of Rotherham and Rochdale, or is it too soon to suggest that we are making progress?
Well, it's almost a decade since the Rotherham crisis sort of hit the national consciousness. From 1997 to 2013, over 1,400 children in the town were abused by those gangs. And it was only revealed after a series of reports by the Times newspaper in 2012, which then led to several national public inquiries. And the NCA, when they did their own review in 2015, they actually increased the number of victims. So when they stood in, that happened. Lessons have been learnt in some cases, but not all. And in December, His Majesty's Inspectorate of the Constabulary Fire Rescue Services is a huge name for a big watchdog that keeps an eye on all the police forces. It looked at 27 forces across the country, and it found that 4 of them were totally inadequate when it came to dealing with child abuse, and 14 required serious improvement. So even among that reporting at the time, when that came out in December, when that watchdog released that report, one of the core kind of the shining lights from that report, the positive steps, was that the National Police Chiefs Council could say this task force, this specialist unit, had accelerated police work, had made a significant difference, and we're seeing some of that in the data they've released today with those arrests, those suspects, and so many of those new officers trained.
OK. Charlie Peters, thank you very much indeed.